Cool. Okay. Coming up in, 12 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, you've all got to turn your audio down now, haven't you? I had the level wrong. Yeah, sorry. We got God has popped in. Godfrey Bloom's here. God bless him. No, I'll tell you, very, very punctual. Coming up in 8.5 minutes, people. Actually 9, because guess what? My clock's wrong.
You're too slow.
Okay, dear boy, well done.
up Revolution Radio, people. Skype. Good morning, good evening, good people. This is the Daily Chaos. The show ain't daily, but the chaos is. I'm Olly Connelly. Thanks for turning up. Trouble, as is so often the case, patching into Revolution Radio, but we will be going out there. We are going out on YouTube, Facebook, D-Live, wakeupuk.net, God bless ya. And we're going out on Revolution Radio. Yeah, hey. Thanks so much for patching us in, folks, from the studio there. Rumble, Rumble Pads. Yeah, that's the place to watch the show. What is it? ko.click/Rumble. Or at Revolution Radio or at Wake Up UK. The rest of them, you know what? I'll tell you what, I don't really give a stuff. Today, yes, coming up, Russia kills COVID. Apparently, big lineup. Godfrey Bloom, David Kurten, David Vance, Stephen Place, Bill Etheridge, and yours truly. Isn't it convenient? Yeah, just as the Pfizer docs reveal the quax killed or adversely affected many thousands of people at least. Just as the COVID narrative collapses, falls through the floor, is proven to have been a fascist Big Pharma confidence trick. And just as more and more are becoming aware of the intent to use the scamdemic to assist rolling out the totalitarian Great Reset. It's flag bearer. The fakestream media reset their targets on a newly revised villain, Russia. Any old distraction. So how accurate is the reportage on what is going on in the vicinity of Ukraine? Why? And what is the genuine backstory to the former Soviet territory that's since folded to globalist political control? Godfrey Bloom, thank you for joining us. I want Bill really to take charge of this chat with you, but maybe, sir, if you would open up, please, by telling us what you think of the official narrative going on now. How accurate are the facts that we're seeing in the mainstream media regarding this invasion of Ukraine by Putin's Russia?
Well, nobody really knows anything, so there's no much point in really commenting on what's happening at this particular moment, because there's no way of knowing the truth. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to just pick up on how we got here, because the problem that we have with journalism, mainstream media, the problem in the West, the problem that we have with the man at the golf club who's suddenly become an amazing expert on geopolitical military strategy, all these kind of things. And we don't understand how we've got there. Now, I wrote for the the Institute of Direct Democracy, an article 6 years ago that the expansion of NATO would come at a cost. And this is one of the problems that we have. Now, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a sort of deal struck that the Warsaw Pact countries had collapsed. Obviously, they were no more, but there was really no need for NATO. there was no real case anymore for NATO. And I was a big NATO supporter, an old soldier. There it is. And of course, I'm also qualified in geopolitical strategy. I've also done the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst course on Soviet studies, which involved a lot of Russian history. So I'm not a layman. And it seems to me that the only people we've heard from, generally speaking, thus far are laymen. And this is too dangerous to listen to idiot journalists and the golf club gobshite. We need to actually consider what's going on. Now, this expansion that we've had against the agreement that we had with Gorbachev, that we wouldn't expand it, has drifted up through the Baltic, Estonia, Latvia, and right up to the Russian border through the Baltic. And of course, Poland has come into NATO, and so has Romania, and so has the Central European countries. And what has actually happened here is, of course, people say, oh, well, NATO is defensive and it's just a defensive arrangement. Well, that's quite true. It used to be. It used to be that. It was a defensive arrangement against the Soviet Union, which is a political hostile place and a militaristic power, and not very nice. NATO's jolly good. NATO worked very well, but it's an anachronism now. We don't need NATO. Never mind expanding it. And we were taught by Professor Connelly, Professor Donnelly, rather, that in order to get to the bottom of these matters, you have to think like a Russian. You have to take a Russian perspective on how they feel. You can't suddenly do this from an armchair in London or Washington. You have to think, how are they feeling? And of course, now NATO is a base for foreign troops. It's a base for foreign troops. We have Canadian troops in Latvia, for example. We have British troops in Poland. We have American missile systems in Romania, all under the NATO flag. Now, you have to look at it from a Russian perspective. How do you view this? You view this, of course, if you're a Russian, as being a fairly aggressive play. And if you look at the way the Americans have behaved post-Vietnam, you've seen their desire for regime change stretched right across the world. Now, the Americans have 200,000 overseas military personnel and 800 or so overseas bases. They wouldn't put up with this in their backyard, and I'm old enough to remember Cuba. I was a teenager at the time, when President Kennedy said, I will not have Russian missiles in my backyard. And there was a standoff with Cuba, which everybody knows about. I happen to live through it, but the history books are all there to see. And of course, the Russians withdrew. So the Americans won't put up with this. They also had regime change in Grenada and Panama. And they've also gone for regime change, quite bloody regime changes in Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan, Syria, so on and so forth. So the master class in regime change and invading other people's countries is America. They don't have the white hats anymore. The Americans don't have the big white hat, and the Russians the big black hat, the bad guys. It's not as simple as that. The Russian government isn't very nice. I don't think Putin's very nice, but then I don't think the Ukrainian government is very nice either. And I don't think some of the Western governments are very nice, with lockdown and coercing people with experimental vaccines, which is all coming unraveled now as we speak. What a lucky war it was for the pharmaceutical companies to take the spotlight of what's been going on in that particular department. So this is what happened. Now, a few years ago, Putin wrote to NATO, the Secretary General of NATO, Stolberg, I think his name is, and he said, we will not tolerate a Ukraine which is a member of the European Union or NATO. We won't tolerate it. It's right on our border. There's 1,000 kilometers of border, and we won't have it. And so be told. If you look at the reply he had from the Secretary General, it was absolutely unbelievably, and its lack of diplomacy. It was just as close. Basically, it was bugger off. It's none of your business whether Ukraine joins NATO or not. Bugger off. And that's the letter. You can't You can't deal with Russia like that. You can't deal with Russia and expect to get away with it. So the bear has been prodded and prodded and prodded now for years, and it's turned. I do not support the invasion of Ukraine. I'm not supporting it. What I'm trying to do is persuade people to actually understand it. Because if we don't understand it, we're never going to get anywhere. We have to understand where they're coming from. Or this is going to get worse.
Bill?
Yeah, well, hi Godfrey, good to see you, sir.
Hi.
Thank goodness that you're on saying this, Godfrey, because the amount of times I've been trying to have this conversation with people, and they're drawing all these false parallels, with 1939 and Hitler sweeping across the continent, and anyone who disagrees with going to war is an appeaser and all the rest of this nonsense. And the fact that you're actually demonstrating there from an academic point of view, as well as being a military man, the fact that we have to look at this in a different way and understand the context of what's going on right now is incredibly valuable. And I'm glad you're doing that. I mean, my brief context of seeing the corruption of the EU and the Ukraine dealing with each other was there was a vote on further cooperation between the EU and the Ukraine while I was an MEP. And we had a live link up to the Ukrainian parliament. And we had, you'll remember this, Godfrey, where we had votes where we could only have yes or abstain on the vote. And we all were going to go for abstain. But even before we pressed our buttons, the Ukrainian parliament started cheering and celebrating because the vote had been passed. And we hadn't even pressed the button. So, this is some background. And I think it's valuable to see that this isn't just a mad tyrannical dictator trying to sweep across Europe. He has very limited and, well, maybe not limited, but he's very precise and thought through objectives. Would you agree?
Yes. And you have to go back even further. You have to really go back pre-Soviet Union. You really have to go back to Peter the Great, if you will, to understand the Russian psyche on this. You have to look at the Russian situation with thousands and thousands of miles worth of land borders. They see themselves as vulnerable. And if you look at the history, that is not unreasonable. If you look at the invasion by Napoleon, if you look at the Great War, if you look at the invasion from Hitler, they see themselves as a potential victim here. And they want buffer states. And as I say, it goes right back to Peter the Great. They like neutral buffer states on these borders. They don't want hostile borders. And this is the problem. And this is how they see it. And they see these missiles. They see boots on the ground, and they're saying, what's going on? There is no Warsaw Pact country anymore. And I'm still seeing phraseology like the invasion of the Crimea. Well, this Western propaganda by some people, I have to tell you, who are otherwise extremely intelligent people, who simply are buying lock, stock, and barrel this spin on this conflict, in the same way that a lot of very, very intelligent people bought the spin by Big Pharma on the problems of COVID and masks and lockdown. They bought into it. You wouldn't have thought, would you, that people would buy in yet again to Western mainstream media propaganda? But it seems that they can't get enough of it. Now, the Crimea is 95% ethnic Russian and Russian speaking. They had a plebiscite. They voted overwhelmingly to join the Russian Federation. It wasn't a question. They weren't invaded or coerced in any way. They felt they would be better protected from what is a very unpleasant regime in the UK, although nobody seems to understand how unpleasant it actually is.
In Ukraine. In Ukraine.
So this is one of the problems that we have. It's people are just not understanding the truth of the matter here. And if you look at the casualties in the what they call the Great Patriotic War, we're talking millions. We're talking millions, tens of millions of civilians and soldiers killed. And unless you understand that this is their perspective, we aren't ever going to get to base camp for a deal. And I believe there can be a deal. I believe there can be a deal here, even at this late stage. The reason that the military the military side from the Russians has stalled, and it has stalled by the look of it, and we don't know. I'm guessing that it's stalled, is because the Russians don't want to lay waste the Ukraine. It's in nobody's interest to do that. And it's not good on the world stage, so on and so forth. So what they've actually done is they've reined back from a total blitzkrieg kind of invasion that we saw from the Germans when the Germans invaded. We had blitzkrieg, we had airstrikes, and all the rest of it in 1939. We had all that. They're not doing that. They're actually being a little bit like the old Chinese generals. They're moving their pieces round the board, hoping that if they put that there, and they move their knight over there, and they move their queen over there, they can come to a deal. And I think that's what they really want. They want a deal. Now, how do we do the deal? How do we do the deal? Well, I think it's relatively simple. And I think your base camp, or your template, if you will, could be Moldova, which is only just on the south end of the Ukraine. Now, it's only a tiny little country, of course. It's a tiny, insignificant little country. But in their constitution, they ban any foreign soldiers or foreign weapons on their territory. It's not allowed under their constitution, and there are none. So Moldova is not seen as a threat at all in any way by Russia. So it'll be left alone. They're not interested in it. But we've been pumping weapons into the Ukraine. The West has been pumping weapons, highly sophisticated weapons, into the Ukraine for a few years. We saw in 2014 that the elected government of the Ukraine in 2014, which was relatively friendly to the Russian Federation, was actually usurped and overthrown by the neocons in Washington and the CIA. And we know that they put round about $5 billion into that. So what it did, it got rid of their legitimate government, their elected government, and they turned it into, it was another regime change, which the Americans love. They love regime change. They want everybody to be their puppet. And of course, most NATO countries are, including ourselves, sadly. We've got Andrew Neil, when he was at the BBC, who would just read out CIA press releases. He didn't question them. And forced flag attacks in Syria, for example, are a classic example. So the whole Western media is ganging up on this thing. World Economic Forum stuff. It's the same with the jabs. It's the same with everything. Dissent isn't possible. You cannot dissent. And I've been taken down loads of times. Social media is heavily censored. Nobody's allowed to come on and say any dissent. You can't have dissent against vaccines, dissent against climate change, dissent against the expansion of NATO. It just isn't allowed on. So we now live in this quite extraordinary world where people are only getting information from one source, and they're behaving like in that way. They're behaving. Now, what is disappointing is that not enough people are going, just a minute, we know you're lying. You keep on lying to us. You've been lying to us for years about almost everything. 25 years of climate change. And about time it happened. What is disappointing? Maybe perhaps not enough. So we've been getting this constantly, but people still seem to believe it. And I can't understand why they do this. Why would we be being told the truth about this particular conflict when we haven't been told the truth about anything else for nearly 30 years? So this is the problem. It's
a great point. There's a couple of things on what you've just said that I want to come back to. One a more precise point, and one the larger point that you've just made. But the precise point is, you say about this deal that can be struck with Ukraine being effectively neutral and pulled out from all engagements. That would rely on there being a Ukrainian state. I'll use that word rather than government. A Ukrainian state that wasn't corrupt and riddled from top to bottom with EU money and funds being poured in and people being bought. Which, your solution there is absolutely the one that would work. But I think it's probably not going to happen, simply because of the fact that the Ukrainian state is perhaps one of the most corrupt ones that I ever came across in my limited time working as an MEP. And then the secondary point, which I think is really interesting, and I totally concur with you on this, as I think you know, but there's so much now, one source of everything, one opinion, one truth that is allowed. And that one truth follows the same pattern through everything, through jabs, through losing your freedoms and rights into who we should fight and who's the bad guy in a war. And there is, and this is what I despair a little bit about, Godfrey. And you know, I admire you've always had the spirit of fight in you. I've not been doing it as long as you, and I do sometimes start to despair because I look around me and everyone's buying this crap, and it doesn't matter how often you ram the truth back at them. You point out time and time again what's going on, and they don't even countenance it. It's the most powerful, almost brainwashing, or maybe it's just people are too lazy to think. But they're being led by the nose through losing their freedoms, now being led into what could prove to be an absolutely catastrophic war. I don't know how we combat it, Godfrey, because the truth seems to be in a tiny minority, and we seem to be being censored and cut at every possible chance. It's almost a losing battle, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's probably because so far people haven't felt the pain. So they haven't felt the pain of the energy crisis that's coming upon us. They haven't felt the pain yet, and I think they will, of the collapse of the central banking systems globally and fiat currency. The global debt stands at the moment, corporate, personal, and national debt globally stands at $275 trillion. This is, of course, completely unsustainable. And the idea that we can sanction Russia on these matters, the numbers don't work. The numbers don't work. Because Russian debt is 25% of GDP, for example. It's a figure that we'd all die for in the West. You know, their balance of payments, their everything that they have, we can't threaten them as much as they can threaten us. And I think it hasn't been thought through by the West, but I think this will collapse the ECB. I think it will collapse the euro, and I can't see how anybody's going to get out of it, because what will happen is Russia, for its exports, its energy exports, is going to demand gold. They don't want foreign currency, which is going to be manipulated against them. They'll want to exchange it for gold. And this is why the Russians have been building up their gold reserves. China's been building up their gold reserves. And of course, all this really has pushed the natural enemy, if you will. One of the natural enemies of Russia, the Russian Federation, is China. And every time we do this, we push them together. They're getting closer and closer together, and that becomes a very, very important power base, the axis of the Russian Federation and China. And that's a very dangerous combination, and we're pushing them together because he who is my enemy's friend, and these kind of things, and that's how they're thinking. That's how they're thinking in China. No good will come of it. And let's look at what else we're hearing. We're hearing otherwise perfectly respectable Conservative Party MPs suggesting that we could confiscate the wealth of Russian expatriates through no process of law. And David Davis is the last one to say that we'll just confiscate their wealth. Well, you know, this is a free society. You can't go around doing that sort of stuff. It's the sort of stuff that we're accusing Putin of doing. We're doing ourselves. And we've been doing it ourselves now for some years. You cannot drive a coach and horses through the principles of English law. The principles of English law are there to protect the citizen. They're not there as a stick to beat the citizen. And to suggest that you can steal money because somebody happens to be Russian is utterly ludicrous. And we talk about Nazism. Of course, they stole Jewish gold because they were Jewish. You know, can we just get some balance in here, please? You know, why is it the Americans can do something, or the European Union can do something, or Britain can do something, and the Russians can't do something, or the Chinese can't do something? Why don't we step back? And this is what I say what we need to do. Get a template of Moldova or something like it for the Ukraine. We can't do anything about the corruption in the Ukraine. that is probably going to be corrupt forever. But then our own governments are corrupt now. You know, we're no longer the shining star. The American Constitution has been trashed. The principles of English law have been trashed. The 1688 Bill of Rights have been trashed. All these have been got rid of. So we are going down the World Economic Forum route to fascism. I don't use that as a pejorative term, fascism. You know, like a student shouting fascist, you know, a moron spotting student. I don't do that. Fascism is a system of government. And basically, in a nutshell, it is big business, banks and politicians ganging up and not in the people's interest. And that's it. And that's the EU to a T. That is the EU. It's where the United States are going. And it's pretty well much what you're seeing in Ukraine and Russia to a very large extent. But what you can do, you can demilitarize because it's much easier monitored. It's an easier thing to monitor because Russia have satellites, America have satellites, we have satellites. So if you take out everybody, including the Russians, let's move everybody out. All the tin hats and guns, all the systems going, all that, let's go. And the Russians will then do a deal and they'll say, right, well, now it's demilitarized. We don't have an issue with that. We don't have a problem with that. It was this build-up of the military. And another conservative MP said, why don't we use the missiles that we have, NATO missiles in Romania, to shoot down Russian planes over Ukrainian airspace? And Ukraine isn't even a member of NATO. Do you know, I think probably at least 300 MPs in the House of Commons don't realize that Ukraine isn't a member of NATO. They don't actually know that because they're all stupid, especially the Scottish nationalist MPs. You know, they don't really get anything. So what we've got to do is step back, and we can save this. We could save this with goodwill and sensible, because nobody wins. I've done lots of stuff on this in the past. I've done lots of videos. Nobody wins a war. Nobody ever wins a war. Nobody gets the result out of a war. And what I see the template here working at the moment, I'm a great student of the Great War. I did my thesis on geopolitical history. 1914. This is starting to sound like 1914. Foghorn diplomacy, stirred up by the tabloid press, and we heard it in Paris in 1914. Berlin. We heard it in Berlin, and we heard it in London. It'll be over by Christmas. Yeah. We've heard all this before. It cost the British Empire 1 million dead and 2 million permanently maimed, badly maimed. No good comes of war. And the trouble is, the people who advocate it, the neocons in Washington, are safe in their bunkers. You know, the golf club bore is moving the cruet round and round and round, saying, oh, if we do this and we do that and do the other. Safe in the knowledge they're not going to be called upon to go personally.
Exactly. All
right?
Exactly.
And that's the problem. War is all very good. And it always reminds me, of course, does it not, of that great poem by Siegfried Sassoon. If I were fierce and bald and short of breath, I'd speed dumb heroes up the line to death. Yeah. It's been around for a long time and it hasn't died out. And I think that's the tragedy. But of course, we do have a generation now, probably 2 generations, who are incapable of critical thinking or risk assessment. And we've seen that we've got a nation globally in the West of people who are fundamentally just plain stupid. And I don't mean they might have a certificate on the wall saying they went to Oxford or Cambridge, but if you drill down, they're actually just pretty stupid people. I've got a window cleaner who is much more intelligent and worldly wise than some of the tosspots I see with university degrees.
Do you think that there might be some link into, you know, with this saber rattling that's going on? Do you think there's a link because to the fact that in the past we've had leaders who either have served in wars or who had parents who served in wars? For example, I spent a lot of time when I was growing up with my grandfather, who was in the tank in the Second World War, actually went through Brussels. And you hear of the consequences of war, and perhaps you're a little bit more cautious because, as you just laid out, the vast inhuman insanity of so many deaths and so many injuries. And do you think perhaps it might be the case now it's a lot easier for these people to be so gung-ho because we've apart from a few relatively minor engagements, we really haven't had that bigger a war in living memory?
I think you're absolutely right. I think you've hit the nail on the head. The reason that the Americans under President Eisenhower didn't get involved in any wars, any new wars, was because he was a soldier and he'd seen it. He'd seen war. These neocons in their Brooks Brothers suits in Washington haven't seen it. What they need to do is, and it's a very militaristic country, America now, as you know. You've been there many times, so have I. Mm-hmm. It's a bit, I liken it to Prussia in the 1890s. You know, there are special cards for your military. There's 10, 15% discounts. There's come in here free. There's get into the park free. Oh, you're a veteran and all this kind of stuff. But there weren't a veteran like the Second World War or even Korean veterans. These people, these soldiers actually got into uniform, volunteered to join the army and go to little countries all over the world and bomb the shit out of them. You know, basically, I'm sorry, you're not going to persuade me that they're all heroes.
No.
This is not good. Militarism is not good. It never has been good, and it's not good now. And it's so funny that the people who are terrified of COVID with their masks and their jabs and their boosters don't seem concerned about drifting into a nuclear war. You know,
no,
that's what I say, risk assessment. They don't understand risk assessment, all right?
It's very peculiar. I must admit, you do see people from behind the cloth mask pronouncing how we should go to war when they're terrified of the flu. I mean, it is quite bizarre. But onto a serious thing that I cast one eye to on all this, and I saw it reported recently that whilst all our attention was on Europe and Ukraine, the Chinese were probing Taiwan's defences. Now, I mean, it may well be a perfect opportunity for some global game playing by the Chinese, would it not? And if they get involved, and if we show weakness again after the shambles of Afghanistan, and then what's happening here, if there were a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, would that not sort of tip the West into an even quicker decline than we've been expecting and witnessing?
Well, I could be wrong in my assessment of this, but I don't see that happening for a number of tactical military reasons. The closest part of the coast of Taiwan to the Chinese mainland is 100 miles. It's very, very difficult to launch an invasion over 100 miles to a sophisticated opponent. And the Taiwanese have up-to-date stuff, up-to-date missiles, it's all up-to-date stuff. They're not a Mickey Mouse power. They might be small, but they're quite a powerful little nation. And of course, then you have the hinterland of Taiwan. Not many people understand that the Japanese Navy is about the 5th biggest in the world and probably one of the most efficient. So you have Japan to contend with. You have South Korea, which has quite a big standing army and a very up-to-date air force and missile systems, of course, all of which are American. So I don't see the military option coming forward from China. But what I do see perhaps happening, and this business of testing went on all through the Cold War. You know, it went on all through the Cold War. The Russian Bear aircraft used to fly up to Scotland and we'd scramble and take off. And there were instances where the pilots would wave at each other. It was a sort of game, probing, checking, counter-checking, so on and so forth. And this is natural. This is what happens. This is what happens in the air war. Now, I don't see the only way that China could win a war against Taiwan is to completely devastate the place. And that's in nobody's interest at all. They could flatten Taiwan. Where's that going to take? And get very heavily retaliation indeed from the Taiwanese. Where's that going to take anybody? It's not going to take anybody where. And the Chinese, don't forget, look long term. The Orientals aren't like us. We know that our politicians, for example, and we both know them quite well from our own party, are only concerned about the Sunday papers. What's going to happen in the Sunday papers? Is that kind of short-termism, or the longest they see is the next election, which is 3 years away. They don't think further than that because they've got tiny little brains. Now, the Orientals don't think like they want to know where they might be in 10 years' time, where they might be in 15 years' time, and how they can get some sort of deal going with Taiwan, drawing Taiwan away from the pocket of the United States, which will probably come when we see the collapse of the reserve currency, the dollar. And have to bear in mind this, and people don't always understand this. You can be a big military power, and the United States is the biggest military power in the world, probably the biggest military power the world's ever seen. But if you're economically weak, it doesn't work. and Russia was very strong militarily, but it was economically weak. You cannot run that kind of debt. You cannot spend $1 trillion a year on your military with borrowed money. They're not making it. They're not a rich country. They're no longer rich. They're verging on bankruptcy, and you've only got to visit places. You look at downtown, some of the states, particularly the democratic states. I mean, it's third world stuff. Baltimore and places like that, and even parts of California. So America isn't what it was. America is not what it was. They're militarily powerful, but it's on borrowed money, and I suggest it's on borrowed time. So when Taiwan sees that, Taiwan might be, in 10 years' time, may be happy to go, look, we're going to be a neutral state. We're not going to be aligned to anybody at all. And we're going to continue trading with China, which, of course, is a very big trade between Taiwan and China. Everybody forgets about that. And as the great philosopher said, when trade crosses borders, armies don't.
Yes.
Trade is always the key here. Trade. If we all trade, and this is what, let's get rid of tariffs. Let's demilitarize and get rid of tariffs. Who pays the tariffs? The citizen pays the tariffs, doesn't he? There's nobody else who can pay it. If there's a 10% tariff on an imported good, who pays it? Poor old Joe Sixpack, isn't it?
I'm all for that. Let's bring all the tariff barriers down. Total free trade. That's
absolutely.
Now I've got a couple of quick ones because I can see our cast is growing, and the first question I'm going to ask you is quite specific and a military one, because I've been dying to ask you this because I think you'll be able to explain this to me. And then the second one is a much larger one, which goes to a lot of what you said earlier. The specific question is that this Russian convoy that appears to be mired in the mud outside Kiev, and you were saying before it's possibly part of a tactic where they're holding back so that negotiations can take place. If the Ukrainian military was looking at that, surely, and I'm as you know, Godfrey, I have no military background at all, so shoot me down in flames on this one, but surely this is the ideal time for, if the Ukrainians actually want to engage, surely while they're mired there in the mud just outside of Kiev, wouldn't that be the best time to try and hit the Russians if they're serious about fighting back against this, or are they just stuck in a defensive action?
I don't know enough about the situation on the ground at the moment, but I can only guess. But I would guess that the Russians could take Kiev in the morning if they so choose. But that isn't what their game plan is. What they want is, I think, what should be on the table, what could be on the table. I think they just want the Ukraine demilitarized. That's what they want. They want the threat to go away. They don't even seem to want regime change. There's been no talk about regime change either. So I think from a military perspective, but of course, once they've invaded, once you have civilian deaths ratcheting up, then you've got a completely different game. And I don't think that's what the Russians actually want. If they'd wanted that, they would have got in much harder, much quicker, and it would all be over militarily by now. But I don't think that's what they're actually wanting. They want a negotiated peace, a demilitarized Ukraine, and I think the West could facilitate that before it gets any worse, and I think they should.
Okay, now the bigger question, which, as I've seen, our cast is growing, and we've seen Mr. Kurten has arrived on the screen as well. Good to see you, David.
Hi.
You spoke before about, Godfrey, about the fact that you thought this would possibly facilitate the collapse of the financial system. You talked about hardship and difficulty that was coming in perhaps on the back of what's going on now. Do you think that the only way that we will get any real comeback, any real freedom, any real democracy, people like David and the current crop of sort of freedom-focused politicians are going to make breakthroughs, Godfrey, is if there comes to be an economic catastrophe and they try to put the Great Reset in and people feel the pain, and that's when the uprising starts? Or is that overly dramatic?
No, I don't think so. One thing we do know, the fiat currency system and the banking system as it stands at the moment is going to collapse. But that there's no doubt. That isn't a hypothesis. We know that's going to happen. We don't know when it's going to happen. Now, what will be the kickback effect of that is that normally when you get that kind of ground trembling problem, that we had in the French Revolution or we had in the Russian Revolution, so on and so forth. If we look at it historically, we would like to think, wouldn't we? Everyone would go, the problem that we've had for years is too much government. We've had too much government. This has been created by governments and politicians. The reason we're in the disaster, but that isn't the way people react. They go, we didn't have enough government. The government should have done this, that, and the other. So I think when it all collapses, as it did, of course, in the 1920s and the early 1920s in Germany, what didn't take its place was a libertarian free trade society. It adopted National Socialism and Hitler. Now, what is interesting, though, just to finish on this note before I go, is that Ludwig Erhard, who took over as financial chancellor of Germany in 1945-46, he brought a very much more open social democrat, free trading, semi-libertarian type of approach to the Renaissance in the German economy, which is why the German economy overtook us by the late 1950s, because we had socialism. We adopted socialism after the war, ironically, under Clement Attlee, a heavily socialist government, and Ludwig Erhard was on record as actually saying to the British, we tried that. We tried National Socialism. It didn't work. What we're going to do now is let the people build their own businesses. We're going to build it from scratch. And trade unions in that period in Germany were on the side of the company. They wanted good for their workers, but they knew that their interests were the same thing. Now, we had the 50s and 60s. We didn't understand, our trade unions didn't understand that their futures were totally entwined with the company they worked for. So we lost our motorcycle industry, we lost our car industry, we lost all that kind of thing. It all went because the trade unions were completely stupid and the management was dire. Appallingly bad management. And you put those two things together and Germany overtook us. As did Japan, but Japan's another whole kettle of fish. We don't want to go down that route.
That's it. Well, thank you, Godfrey. As always, it's been absolutely illuminating, and I'm so glad to have heard you said many of the things you have, because it was along the lines I was thinking. It's good to have some affirmation from someone who actually knows their stuff. So that's been great, and. I don't know if you're sticking around for a while to join in the debate.
I have to go, but I do wish everybody well. And there's some very, very good speakers. I know I follow them on Twitter, and I know they'll have plenty to add.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, thanks, sir. And let's hope we speak again soon. And all the very best to you as always, sir.
Thanks very much.
God bless you, Goddess.
Bye.
God bless you. God bless you, Goddess. God bless him. David Kurten, not much to follow there, sir.
I don't know how I'll do that. Lovely to see you, Olly.
Oh, I tell you, I'm so chuffed to have you and Bill on the same show, head to head. This is brilliant. Now,
Bill, my brother.
We're often classed as being the same person. I've been often told what a great speech I've made. I thought, hang on, that was Dave.
There you go. I get you bigged up everywhere, don't I, Bill?
That's it. Yeah, you keep up the good work. It's doing wonders for my cred.
Bill, already.
It's great to see you, mate. It's been a while, and it's great to see you. I don't know how much of what you caught of that conversation with Godfrey, but we went through the situation in the Ukraine, and then we went on to larger issues, as with Godfrey you always do, and he has a great view on things. From your perspective, then, because I asked these questions on the Ukraine with genuine interest, because I'm completely baffled by what's going on. Godfrey gave a pretty interesting spec on it, but how do you see the situation in the Ukraine? I mean, is it a straightforward thing of an evil tyrant attacking and sort of doing a 21st century Adolf, or is it more nuanced than that?
Well, what we're being told by the mainstream media is just that. It's very simple that, yeah, Putin is like Hitler. He's invading Ukraine because he's bad. There's nothing wrong with Ukraine at all. And that's what you're getting. But I generally take the view that if the Tory party, the Labour Party, the mainstream media all around the world suddenly start spinning a narrative all at the same time, they even use the same phrases as each other, then they're spinning a narrative, and the truth is either very, very different from what they're saying, or potentially the complete opposite of what they're saying. So I held off from commenting too much about it for a few days because it's really hard to actually know what's going on. It's very frightening. You see pictures of civilians, being injured and suffering and having to leave their homes and so on. So, obviously that's going on with some people. But there's been an awful lot of fake news, which has been spun by the mainstream media. I mean, for example, there was this story on the first day or second day of the 9 soldiers on this Snake Island who told the Russian warship to F off, and then they were bombed and killed. But actually, it turns out that that was completely untrue, and they're alive. And they're just captured as prisoners of war and so on. And then there was the woman with the bandage on her head that was on all the papers in the UK, I think on the 3rd or 4th day. It turns out that she's actually working for the equivalent of the behavioral psychology unit, so the Ukrainian psychological operations unit. And so, you question whether this was all a setup and so on. So, I mean, clearly, it looks like the Russian military have taken out the Ukrainian military almost absolutely, but they're going very, very softly and trying not to cause any deliberate damage to civilians or harm to civilians as much as possible. So, I did hear at the end of the conversation there with Jeffrey that, this convoy is stopped outside Kiev and they're not seeming to be doing anything. And people are saying, well, what's going on here? But from what I've heard from people on the ground that are not in the mainstream, they're probing all the cities to see what resistance there is. And then if there is resistance, they're retreating and moving back because they really don't want to hurt civilians. And they're just seeing how much of resistance is from the army itself, the people, and also, what they did say, what Putin has said, is that there are a lot of the neo-Nazi bands and brigades that have been shelling the Russian minority in the east, and he wants to put a stop to that and protect the Russian-speaking people who have been shelled almost continuously for the last 8 years in the Donbass region.
Well, God's view on what the Russians were doing was that they were holding off, hoping that the Ukrainians would come to the table and come to a sort of neutrality deal. Where they'd be allowed to continue, but without NATO being involved in their country. But what I seem to be seeing, and I'm interested in what you say about the propaganda, because I keep seeing, I like boxing, I keep seeing the Ukrainian boxers, the famous ones. They're always there posing for still pictures with rifles and so on, but never moving, never on a video. Lots of very nicely posed photographs defending their country, and no action going on. And one of the other things that God has said, and this ties in with, it's a little bit like the build-up to the First World War, with lots of fanfare and media hype about, it's a righteous battle and we should all pour our troops in. And of course, that didn't turn out too well. Are you hearing that echo of the First World War in all this?
Not so much. I mean, I'm not expecting this to escalate into a continent-wide conflagration. I don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think there's a lot of fear-mongering, and people are being made to worry that this is going on. There's talk of nuclear weapons. Putin has said he's put his nuclear unit on high alert, so people are talking about this. I mean, some of the things from the Western side also are utterly ridiculous. I mean, Liz Truss sort of semi-encouraging British citizens to go and fight in the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, which would be illegal. I mean, you don't encourage your people to get involved in a foreign war. If that were the Middle East, and they'd gone to fight in Syria, regardless of what side they went on, if they come back, they'd be arrested. Civilians who have got no military background, or even if they had, should not be going off to Ukraine. I mean, as far as I know, we haven't made a declaration of war on Russia. The UK is not at war with Russia, so there's no way that she.
I wouldn't rule anything out the way things are looking at the moment. It seems to be a collective loss of sanity from our leaders. I mean, I don't know if you saw Biden's latest rant of insanity, where first of all he confused Ukraine with Iran, which of course anyone could do that, couldn't they? And then he ended up his speech by shouting to God bless our troops, go get him.
Astounding. I mean, this is, jingoism at another level, isn't it? I mean, it's, rattling the saber, stirring up, battle fever, if you like. This is not what we should be doing when we're talking between nuclear powers. We all need to try to de-escalate this. And, Putin made some speeches before this happened, when there were the build-up of troops around the border. And at that time, nobody really expected that he was going to do it. I actually thought he was bluffing, but then he went and he sent the troops in. And I think it was a bit of a shock to quite a lot of people. But he did say at that time, what I want is a guarantee that Ukraine will not join NATO and NATO will not try to expand into Ukraine. And that was the understanding between the West and Russia from the very beginning when the Berlin Wall came down. But, NATO has been expanding. Okay, fair enough. Poland and the Czech Republic and so on. But to try to go into Ukraine really is a provocation to Russia in a way. It would be far, far better to say, okay, we'll leave Ukraine and Belarus alone. They can be, neutral countries. Russia's happy. The West doesn't have any strategic interests in Ukraine and Belarus. Why do this? Why try to stir up the hornet's nest? Couldn't we have tried over the last 30 years to actually, come to a much more warm and friendly relationship with Russia? The Russian people are lovely. I've been there a couple of times. Don't want to say that. I'm not a spy, by the way. I went to teach some chemistry lessons when I was doing.
You blew your cover there, David.
So that's all I was doing in Russia.
He was working in a lab in Moscow, concocting God knows what. Chemist. David, look, come on. Is this not about the Great Reset going on? I mean, is this not awfully convenient? It covers up the whole broken narrative about COVID, for example, and it's another great way to basically bust up people's economies, ruin production chains, food shortages, for example, wheat and all the rest of it. Is this not just another bit of the Great Reset playing out, or do you think that it is entirely independent of that?
It's really hard to know, but that is a very big possibility. I don't believe the mainstream at all, but the counter narrative is that Putin's doing this to protect the Russian-speaking minority in the east of Ukraine. That is completely plausible, and that's probably a lot of that. That's the motivation. But you also got to remember as well, Zelensky's in the World Economic Forum. Putin's in the World Economic Forum. That journalist who accosted Boris Johnson the other day in the press conference and asked for NATO to come in and start engaging with the Russian Air Force is in the World Economic Forum. So they've got their fingers all over this to some extent. It's just impossible to know whether this is actually, a real conspiracy, if you like, between people to actually do this in order to create tension between Russia and the West, to close the borders, to crash a couple of currencies, and then to bring in the digital identity. But, as you say, the Great Reset is being pushed by all parties, and Russia signed an agreement, or they signed up to the World Economics Forum's plans for the fourth industrial revolution last year. So that would bring in digital currency, artificial intelligence, and so on. You know, Russia's been pushing these injections over the last 2 years, their own Sputnik 5 injection, just as much as the West has been pushing the Pfizer and Moderna injections. So, I don't think Putin is the devil or Hitler as he's been portrayed. I can't work out whether he is doing this, for greater Russia, or, for the Russian-speaking minority, or whether he is doing this as part of a big piece of kabuki theater, as some people point out. This is all because it does seem a little bit strange when you hear from the ground. There's all these troops there, but there doesn't seem to be too much actual contact fighting between the big column of troops and the sort of people, Ukrainians on the ground.
We're coming up to a break in just about 30 seconds time, which doesn't leave the time that I want for my next question, which is directed at both of you, Bill and David, and I think you can imagine what it's about. So that's coming up in a couple of minutes' time, folks, just after this break. You're watching Daily Chaos. I'm Olly Connelly. We had Godfrey Bloom on there. We've got David Kurten on now. David Vance is coming up with Stephen Place. Bill Etheridge is here with me. Coming up in another couple of minutes.
Radio at Freedom Slips.
Okay, we can actually carry on. And this question is less pertinent to our American listeners on Revolution Radio anyway. Although, having said that, it is an international presence, Revolution Radio. David and Bill, why don't you just unite? I mean, UKIP clearly is not doing anything useful at all. Full stop. About anything. They're certainly not talking about the scamdemic. They're not talking about, the quax and how kids should not have to take it. They're not talking about the Great Reset and all the rest of it. Bill, I've got a lot of time for you. But your party is crock. David Kurten, I have to say, full respect with the Heritage Party. You are talking about these things. Why don't you guys? What? I still have hope that UKIP could reform, by the way, because I personally believe that it could actually be a force for good, ideally in an alliance with some of the other parties which are more libertarian-minded, like Kurten's Heritage Party. Why don't you guys just get together?
Well, can I just state for the record, I'm not in a position to be able to make those comments on behalf of UKIP. It's above my pay grade. I am a spokesman on the economy, but when it comes to decisions like that, I can only speak for myself. And I think David well knows I've got a lot of respect for him, and I've cheered on a lot of what he's done, particularly his stance and brave fight against the lockdown restrictions and against all of the multiple lies that we faced during the scamdemic. And I think we've always got on well, and I don't understand why people like David aren't on the same team as me. But how that comes about is above my pay grade, and not something that's down to the likes of David and the higher ups within UKIP to discuss. I am merely a sort of old family.
Come on, Bill, that's a bit of a cop-out. You're a former MEP. You're one of the most respected, most recognisable figures from UKIP over the course of the last 10 years or so. You surely can bring a little bit of pressure to bear.
I really can't. I am honestly just a mascot. I'm not, involved in the day-to-day management of the party, leadership of the party. I support Neil Hamilton and back him, but I'm very rarely called on. I do videos and contribute towards the economy policy. But when it comes to decision making, it's the NEC and Neil. And I can only say what I've just said on a personal point of view. I think David's a really sound bloke, always have done, and I really love what he's been doing. And I can say directly to you now, Dad, I've sent you messages and things on Twitter, but say to you directly, you've been an absolute hero during the last couple of years, and massive respect to you for what you've done, and I genuinely mean that, mate.
Oh, thank you, Bill. That's really kind of you. And you're great as well. You've been speaking out about lockdowns and these injections and so on, where many people haven't done, and have been too afraid to speak out from the very beginning because of either pressure from the mainstream media and then the need to virtue signal and not be seen to be rocking the boat. And, I think that's deplorable when, sometimes people know something is going wrong, but they don't speak out when, it's because this is a time, if you can't speak out now when our economy's been ruined and the education's been ruined, the whole fabric of our society's been turned upside down and ripped apart. If you can't speak out about it then over the last 2 years, when are you going to speak out? I mean, you might as well not bother. You might as well go and sort of, pour coffee for somebody. I mean, that's really it. But absolutely. Bill has been great. I've known Bill for a very long time, back in the day in UKIP and so on. But, obviously now I'm in the Heritage Party, and
one sec, David.
I'd always hoped.
One sec,
Sorry,
sir.
Olly.
Just one sec. We're just going to reconnect with Revolution Radio.
Any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Hey, Daily Chaos. I'm Olly Connelly. We had Godfrey Bloom in the first half of this show. Russia kills COVID. Looking at what's going on. We've got David Kurten now having a very fascinating chat with Bill Etheridge. And Stephen Place has just turned up as well. Another former leadership contender for UKIP. And the bottom line, I want to pull you all into this, please, gents. I think we've got David Vance who just popped in as well. Fantastic journalist, a journalist who actually is worthy of the title. Stephen, these guys, I've been asking them, why can you not unite somehow? And Bill's pointed out that it's above his pay grade, that it's an NEC level matter. National Executive Council, whatever. I don't know what the hell they are, to be honest with you, or what they do, frankly. Not a lot by the looks of it, according to me, which is no reflection on some of the individuals in UKIP, by the way. You left UKIP yourself, I know, Stephen Place. Do we not now, looking at what's gone on over the course of the last 18 months or so with this scamdemic, which is now being exposed with, for example, the documents, the Pfizer docs coming out saying how many people died in trials of this drug and were adversely affected and all the rest of it. The whole, the UK government has had to pull back on its NHS quax mandate. We're seeing similar all over the world. The France just today has pulled back on their quax port. The whole narrative has failed. We surely should be able to see this big pharma fascism for what it has been over the course of the last 18 plus months. We should be calling for a Nuremberg 2. We should get these people out of power, the likes of Boris and his sage technocrats and all the rest of it that have done so much damage. God knows what in the mental health aspect. Did a show which was most heart-rending last week called Midazolam Murder. Look it up, people. Should we not be seeing these smaller parties finally get together and actually provide some kind of a foil to this lib lab con? In the case of the UK, or in the States, it's Republican, Democrat, whatever, just a bunch of frauds. Do we not need all these parties to unite and to get together and to finally give us something worth voting for? Mr. Place.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I think I'd like to start by saying I didn't leave UKIP. UKIP left me. And as the branch chair at the time for Bradford and the regional chair for Yorkshire, when we had a leader starting talking about Islam as a killing cult and all that kind of thing, we'd absolutely shot ourselves in the foot before we even started. And so I found it a great heartbreak, really, because we had so many good common sense policies and we talked common sense, but those policies have now been hijacked and stolen by both Labour and the Tories. So that's the first thing about UKIP. And I think it's very, very sad, and history will show that, from 4.2 million voters in 2015 to now nothing. I think it's a very sad thing. In terms of the smaller parties, you've got Reform, you've got David's party, Heritage, you've got Reclaim, all sort of looking at more or less the same policies. As the odd thing that sort of might divide them a little bit, but the commonality across all the parties is there and large to see. And I think you're never going to break the two-party system we've got in this country, I don't think in my lifetime, unless, yes, these parties engage with each other and form one movement. And I don't necessarily think nowadays you need a massively sort of enigmatic leader, or you can have a few leaders. As long as they're singing off the same hymn page and they're talking to people who live in council estates in Bradford and Leeds and Preston and Oxford and Birmingham and all these places. If we start talking to the people in the north of England, because they're absolutely crying out for some leadership and some fresh ideas, if they can get their heads together, and I'm not suggesting this applies to David particularly, but park some egos and start working together with commonality across the board, then I'm telling you now, guys, I'm pretty confident you're going to be swept into power locally and nationally, because Britain is crying out for new direction. We all think we'd all agree on this page, unless I'm mistaken, that Westminster is an absolute cesspit. And it has been for an awful long time. The things that are going on there is just unbelievable. You've got, two of the Labour front benchers now, Jess Phillips and Rachel Reeves, have been investigated by the Parliamentary Standards Committee. You've got the new, the current candidate who's been voted on today, Erdington in Birmingham. Some of the things that she said, if Bill or David or I'd come out with that in our UKIP days, we would have been pilloried and vilified and sent to ostracized, and we would have been the biggest racists and xenophobes and Little Englanders you could ever wish to meet. And she's getting away with it. And if she gets elected today, that to me just further puts another nail in the coffin of any reasonable, sensible opposition to the Tories. And that's where we're at. They're never going to give us proportional representation. We want that. We know we do. I think the majority of the country will get behind that. But sadly, we're fighting a two-party state, and we're not going to beat them unless we give the people of the country a proper, viable, centre-policed, common sense talking party to get behind and rally behind. And I think that the time, never more so, is now.
I want to ask David Kurten that question in relation to the local elections coming up. But before I do, David Vance has joined us. David Vance got a lot of time for as a journalist, super bloke. Recently a grandfather. Congratulations, sir. My question to you, we've got David Kurten here, we've got Bill Etheridge, we've got Stephen Place. We did have Godfrey Bloom in the first hour as well. If these smaller parties could possibly come together and actually unite, and so, for example, they are not competing for the same elections and what have you, and they're supporting each other on policies that really, really are important policies, like exposing the scamdemic, exposing the Great Reset. Do you think that now, as people are perhaps becoming more and more suspicious of what's being said by the mainstream media, that they could be successful against this Pepsi challenge that is, if you like, Lib Lab Con?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here this evening. It's really great to be amongst such a fantastic and select group of people. The answer to your question is, yeah, I mean, that's the only chance. It's kind of, it's really pretty simple. Everything that Stephen was saying there, I mean, I get it. The fact is that we need to smash, we need to destroy the political system that's in place at the moment, because it only delivers for the few, and it's corrupt, and we could talk about it all night. But the only way you can do that is all the small parties have to come together in a proper, some sort of strategic alliance. It's the only way to do it. I've got a little experience of this happening, actually, curiously enough, here in Northern Ireland back in 1998. When there was
recently a grandfather. Congratulations. Sorry, I apologize. My question to you, Balls, my fault. David, please carry on.
Wow. Yeah. I have a memory back in 1998 when here in Northern Ireland, groups of political parties who were arch rivals, actually, but who did share certain values, came together. I was part of it, so I remember it, and it did work, albeit just in the very, very short term. So it's very simple. You either get together and unite, or you'll all be destroyed and gobbled up one by one. It's as simple as that. And that's easier said than done. I fully get that. You know, I know, because I know people pour their heart and soul into their individual party, and they naturally think that their party is the panacea. But honestly, you're in a system that's against you, and you'll never get anywhere. You know, coming fifth or sixth means nothing. All that matters is winning, and the only chance you have of winning is if you come together. But I mean, again, as Stephen said, most parties that I see, sensible sort of challenger parties, have similar policies, similar ideas. There's not very much between them. The only thing that seems to me, Olly, that kind of separates them is ego. Can I say it? Ego. And that egos need to be put to one side. And from my own experiences of, for example, talking to David and talking to Bill and whatnot, these people are eminently reasonable, and I think that I don't understand why there can't be some sort of grand alliance put in place for the future of the United Kingdom, and the rivalries parked, and the things that harmonize, accentuated and brought together. That's what I think that should happen. But you know, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one.
I've even got the name for the party, the National Party, and that will be Reclaim and Reform Our Heritage. There you go.
David Kurten, that is definitely a cue to you then. Local elections, could that not be some sort of a focus for unity?
Local elections are coming up in May, and there's going to be about 6,000 seats up for election in lots of different places in the country. And, you know, for the local elections, I've got no problem at all. You know, we're not going to cover all the seats as the Heritage Party. I don't think any of the smaller parties that you've mentioned are going to be able to cover all those seats. And so we've already got, you know, on a local level, some working together between different parties, you know, for example, in Croydon and you know, other bits, other places. We are already doing that. I think that's the way to go, you know, getting local people, candidates and coordinators together to do that. It's not happening on a national level as such, you know, because I think there's history, you know, and that's unfortunate. So, for example, I set the Heritage Party up at the beginning of the lockdown and was working on it. UKIP weren't doing anything at the time. The Brexit Party were deactivated. They weren't doing anything. As soon as I launched the Heritage Party, then you had Reclaim launched a few days afterwards, which is very, very let's say interesting timing.
Yeah.
You can make whatever inference you like yourself. And then a few weeks after that, the Brexit Party said, we're going to relaunch as Reform. And I was like, why are you doing this when I've just started a party and I'm defending my seat in the London Assembly? I'm going for London Mayor to try to kick Sadiq Khan out, and they all stood against me. So, we didn't stand in Wales, we didn't stand in Scotland. We could have made an arrangement, but that didn't happen. So, I do question whether some of these parties are actually there to split the vote. And that's, especially the ones that are funded by big Tory donors.
Yeah.
Discuss,
yeah.
gentlemen.
Yeah, I understand that, David. Those are fair observations as well. And to be honest with you, to be brutally honest, it's one reason why I stay away directly from party politics, because it's a swamp. But don't you? I mean, don't you agree that ultimately strength lies in unity, just as a general rule of life? And therefore, the more unity that can be found and the more goodwill that can be found, the better. And I know that sounds massively idealistic and whatnot, but I kind of think, look at the awful people that, like you mentioned, Sadiq Khan and whatnot. There's some horrendous people in British politics that need taken down, and there's loads of good people like yourself and others that I do think have got all the right things about them. But if you're too divided, you're never going to, unfortunately, get to where you need to get to. But maybe if you start locally, as you say, in the May elections, maybe that's a good starting point, and build from there. I mean, we're not going to have a general election, I don't think, for a couple of years. So unless Partygate comes back, and I don't think that's going to happen, thanks to other issues. So maybe you start locally and you build it up. But certainly, strength lies in unity.
If you look at Erdington today in Birmingham, I think there's about 12 or 15 candidates. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I think if there was, whilst all the smaller parties, I don't say that sort of disparagingly, but smaller parties keep turning up to by-elections and getting on average 300 votes and losing their deposits. It's pure folly. It's just pure, utter folly. You're not offering anything to anybody, and that's why they're not going with it. But if there was one coalition of parties that stood at one candidate, they agreed upon it, and each of the by-elections, etc., and really rallied round and helped each other and got the other smaller independents and the Christian, British Christians or whatever they're called, these other independent people standing would probably not and would get on board. And so you would have, where you've got them, you obviously have the Tory and the Labour Party, and you would also have the Greens perhaps and the Lib Dems, etc. But then, bringing up the rear would be this new dynamic coalition of good ideas from across the board and from all parts, north, west, south and east of the country, getting together to provide a real alternative offer to the voting public. And until that happens, we're just going to get, I'm 61 in May. I know I don't look it, but I am. But all I've ever known, as we have, all of us in this room now together, all we've ever known all our lives is a Labour or a Tory government. And just look at the state of the country. I could talk to you for 2 hours about what's going wrong in Bradford. I'm pretty sure Bill could about what's going on in Birmingham and the things that are happening there. In Bradford, you've got 4,000 kids in care that the Ofsted say are in serious danger of serious harm. They've had to wrest the children's services off the council. The council are just about to borrow £32 million to build an office block that nobody wants, nobody needs. It's a Labour-dominated council. And so these are the things, these are the fights. Croydon, you mentioned, David, they're bankrupt, aren't they? They bought a hotel somewhere, did the Labour Council, and they've bankrupted themselves. These are the things, they're not servicing the people of Croydon and helping them out. And all these issues need bringing to, but whilst ever we're all turning up and different candidates and all spouting off different things, and choosing local issues that are different in the hope to try and make an impact, then it's, as I said before, to me personally, it's just folly, and I think it's a great shame. I thought UKIP could have been the serious alternative to the two-party system, but sadly, that's gone by the by.
Look, I understand if people don't want to answer this next question, but I think that maybe I'm reading into it wrong, but I think that David Kurten intimated some of the content of my question. Is Nigel Farage serious, or is he a foil to an alternative alliance of parties that would disrupt status quo politics? Please, David Kurten.
I think the attitude of Reform is that they're going to be the biggest party and they're going to squash everybody else. They're going to be the dominant brand. That's the sort of language that they use. And whereas Nigel Farage is not still actively leading the party, he is still on the board of directors of the financial side of the party, and he has, he's the person with significant control, registered at Company House that deals with the finances of the party. So he's still obviously involved with Reform, sort of, back of house. But that's the sort of attitude that they have. So with that, it's you can't really work with somebody who thinks that they're going to crush everybody else and squeeze everybody else out.
So you would say it's more about ego than it is about, if you like, malfeasant politics?
I have no evidence. We can speculate, but I can't make any accusation if I don't have the evidence. That's all I can say about that.
All I would say is across, I know because I talk to people every day, all day, across certainly the north of England and the West Midlands and the middle of the country, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that are politically homeless. And I think if somebody could come forward and provide a good, viable alternative that they can buy into, I think, as I've said before, I think they will be swept into power, and because people are genuinely, absolutely fed up to the back teeth of the two parties that currently hold the reins of power in this country. And at this moment in time, you can probably not get a fag paper between the two of them on policy and ideas, and I think that's a great shame. And there's some great thinkers here. There's some great thinkers on this podcast now, on this show now, providing some good quality alternatives and some better thinking that just thinks of common sense, just sells common sense and speak to the people in a language that they will understand and know, and that's what's needed. And
can I just
please, David Vance, please.
Sorry, David.
David.
Yes, sorry. If I could just come in on this, on Olly, on your question about Nigel Farage, let me just say something, maybe a wee bit controversial, but I think Nigel Farage is the boat that has long since sailed. That's what I think. I think, where was Nigel Farage during the last couple of years when liberty was taken away from the people of his country under the scamdemic? Where was Nigel Farage over that? I'll tell you where. He was nowhere to be seen. And as for, I'm aware of what David Kurten was saying is right. I mean, the monies that party, which he's a board member of, have received, and I understand, David, by the way, they received a very large double-digit contribution very, very recently. They may have their ambitions, and that's all fine, and as far as it goes. But Olly, you asked a question about Nigel, and I think Nigel did his job in terms of Brexit. And since then, I'm not sure what Nigel's job really is. I think it's about Nigel predominantly, if we can say that. I mean, no one should be beyond critique. And I think Nigel Farage achieved a lot of great stuff. I think he's a great chap on an individual one-to-one basis. No doubt about that. But I think we have to move on past Nigel Farage, really. I'm a bit fed up and bored with, will Nigel Farage come and save the country? Will he save the Conservative Party? I mean, I get lots of questions I could ask about Nigel Farage if I wanted to. That's not me just being awkward, but I think people on our side are scared sometimes to criticise Farage. I'm not. Yeah. I mean, if Nigel could get a nice career on Fox News, I'm sure he would be that would have been quite good for him. He's got a gig in GB News, which I consider to be controlled opposition. Did I say that? Yes, I said that. He's done that as well. So yeah, you know, a lot of questions about Nigel. As I say, one-on-one, great chap and all of that, but it's going to take more than that if we're going to change the face of British politics. That's for sure.
I don't think people trust Nigel anymore because he's walked away and he dumped all those candidates. I wasn't part of the party at all in 2019, but I was helping the Bradford South candidate for Brexit Party because I was previously a candidate there myself for UKIP. I was helping him. He was a doctor, an Indian doctor, and he was making great waves at Bradford South. It was a massive sort of majority to overturn at 24,000, but he was doing really, really well. And then obviously they all got the rug pulled from under them, which is what happened with Paul Nuttall in 2017 when I was standing, much to my horror and disgust, having worked my socks off and put a lot of money into it. But I don't think people trust Nigel Farage anymore. But I've heard David. I'm not blowing smoke up David for he's here, but I've heard David speak publicly, and he's a very, very good orator, and he gets across his message very well. You do, David, and you do. It's there, and
this is David Kurten
very well, and he won't want me to hear this, but also Richard Tice speaks very, very well as well. So there are some very good people.
Except he sounds like a Tory minister. He doesn't.
Sorry?
You say you couldn't put a fag paper between Reform and, for example...
No, between the Tories and the Labour, I meant.
Okay, sorry. Because
no, Richard... he does. And people say, well, they're Tory light, aren't they? They're the second Tory party. And that is a label that they're getting, sadly, for them, But yeah, it's a shame. We can't sort of... as I said, I would throw all my weight behind, and it's considerable at the moment. I would throw all my weight behind a joint venture. I really would. As I say, all my ex-friends and colleagues within UKIP, they're all swimming around politically homeless, very frustrated, and in a lot of cases very, very angry. And it's there for the taking, but not sadly as it is at the moment.
Well, look, I'm going to.
The Battling Spen was pretty. Batley Spen was a solitary lesson to everybody. In terms of Labour could have been beaten at Batley Spen. They could have been beaten.
I'm going to change tack slightly because we can go round and round on this, but I'm grateful. I know, reading the comments on a bunch of different networks, how, as you say, Stephen, people are desperate to see unity with some of these, as you say, but people are politically homeless. And me too, by the way. And we absolutely want representation and feel we have none. And we're getting pretty desperate, I want to talk about and ask you guys, I know, David Kurten, you weren't available for too long today. I understand if you need to leave us. And if so, I'll certainly ask you to answer this first anyway. But I want to ask you guys about just how desperate a situation we're in as a nation and globally. And I want to try and gauge your thoughts, please, on how aware people are about the precarity of our situation. David Kurten, please.
Yeah, we're in a very, very precarious situation. I mean, there are people who have been trying to deliberately corrode and undermine the foundations of our nation, our society, our economy, even for a very, very long time. I mean, I've spoken about cultural Marxism a lot, which is the long march through the institutions, people going into universities with the deliberate aim to change the values and say what's good is bad and what's bad is good, and then sow division between different groups with all these new oppressor victim narratives. For example, women are oppressed by men, so therefore it creates enmity between men and women when we should get on together. That's been going on for a very, very long time. Then you've got the whole transgenderism stuff, which is going and being taught to kids. This is the cultural side. Now we've got an economic attack over the last 2 years with COVID, and also an attack on our fundamental freedoms as well. And it's been incredible that the majority of people have just went along with all of the propaganda from the behavioral psychology unit, because it's very, very good behavioral psychology that's actually manipulated people to act in a way that they wouldn't normally do, because they are making decisions which are emotional, because they're plugging into your subconscious mind. That's the whole purpose of this, with all the advertising and the sort of red and yellow striped crazy things that you see all around you. And now, just when people are waking up, and I think the majority of people are waking up to the fact that this whole COVID situation is a scam, and the data is now coming out about how harmful these injections are, and all of a sudden it's war. And then that's going to be used to take away more of our freedoms and to bury all of the things that the government is doing. Pushing through at the moment the police crime courts and sentencing bill, which is going to make some kind of protest illegal, the online safety bill, which is going to make free speech a thing of the past, because you can be accused of misinformation, which is what's misinformation. But this is a new word they've been using. And if you spread misinformation, that can be a criminal act and you can be banned. And so they're doing all of these things. And I think, just when people are waking up, I'm astounded to see a lot of people just gone right back to sleep again. And they've come under like a new spell, if you like, which has been spun because of the whole war narrative, because people are still looking at the mainstream media, the BBC, and believing everything that's on there. I'm just thinking, I'm astounded. I'm thinking, everybody, wake up, get your head out of the mainstream media, the Tories and Labour Party, and there's alternatives there. I've set up the Heritage Party to be an alternative to put our country back on the right path. I've written a manifesto in terms of positive principles. Do have a look at it, which you can do, heritageparty.org. But where are the people? We need the majority of people to actually start, taking action as one to get rid of these people in Parliament. Otherwise,
what do you want people to do? What do you want, candidates or what?
I want members and I want candidates. Yeah, we need more members. We need more candidates to stand in elections.
Never going to happen. Shall I tell
PJ,
you why?
PG, Predator Jeff. Tell us, Predator Jeff, coming in from Cornwall.
It's never going to happen. It's never going to change. Don't look for it. And I'll tell you why. Because people vote strategically. When they've got the Tories, they want to get them out. And the only way to get them out is to vote Labour. So they vote Labour. So they do the reverse thing to get Labour out. And the narrative carries on and on and on. So the independents, all the little parties, don't get a bite at the cherry. It's always the way. It's always the way it'll be.
Got a damn good point.
Well, if you think that, you're never going to do anything. So we do have to break the mentality of people vote Tory to keep Labour out, people vote Labour to keep Tory out, but they're both exactly the same. They're both destroying our country together. They're both two hands of the same head. So we need to break that narrative. And I'm not going to say it's hopeless. It is not hopeless. We are starting, we're building. I want to build a party where we have candidates everywhere to be a challenge. And I'm not going to be defeatist. I'm going to be optimistic. And we do have a chance because we've got millions of people, as you say, who are politically homeless, who are looking for an alternative. We are the alternative. I've set it up. Come and have a look at us. But you can't have that mentality and mindset. You can't be defeatist. Otherwise, you might as well not bother.
It's not about being defeatist. It's not.
It is.
Hang on. It's not about being optimistic. It's not about being pessimistic. It's not about being idealistic. It's about being realistic.
Well, you're looking at the history at least.
Don't do it. You've got to believe in what you're doing, and you've got to believe that you can be successful. And
David, he does have a point, though. I mean, history. If you want to look to the future, you look to your history, all that. History tells us that he's right.
Well, just because something's happened in the past, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. And, if you think, well, nothing is going to change, then, I might as well give up and just go and, wash cars or go and teach chemistry again or something else. But I don't. If I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't be doing this. So
what else can be done that is manageable somehow to help to create this this national. It's a mass psychosis formation, isn't it? That we have that people now I know that they're more suspicious of voting purely Tory or being a Labour man type stuff, but nonetheless there is still this kind of mass. What else can be done to assist to get us out of this terrible political rut?
Yeah, it is absolutely the mass psychosis, but building a political party and building up is a slow process. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, but you've got to have a long-term vision. So, I don't have a magic bullet, a magic silver bullet, but we started and we got to keep going for the long term and, and carry on believing in it.
Can I just come in here and say that, whilst I understand the points being made by Jeff there and whatnot, in politics, and David, this goes back into history, sometimes things happen that you never envisage happening. And sometimes that can be very depressing, like we saw back in March 2020. But they can also sometimes be positive as well. So you do need to hang in there, I think. And I'm also aware of the maxim that, of course, hope makes a good breakfast but a poor supper. So we have to bear that in mind as well. But I mean, I was thinking of moving from the UK to North Korea to find a little bit more freedom. Because I reckon I probably would get more freedom in North Korea based on the direction this country is heading. I mean, Olly mentioned the mess that we're in. We're in a mess because we live under a one system state that calls itself Tory and Labour. I mean, I think most of us recognise that. It's the same. There's no difference. And they know that, and they play the game very cleverly. So politics as it is, the system we have, has absolutely failed. And my problem is at the moment, I mean, I watched them all stand up in Parliament yesterday applauding the Ukrainian ambassador. Did you see that? Yeah. All the same. No, where's the opposition? No opposition. We don't have opposition to the political system in Westminster. So it is absolutely broken from top to bottom. Now, you do have to, take a view, and I think you're probably right, David. You can't do it overnight. And maybe you hang in till a moment happens. Like, for example, I think people were beginning to waken up against the COVID scam, and people realized that, hang on a second, this doesn't feel right anymore, especially the English people, if I may say, more so than maybe Scottish people and whatnot, and the Welsh people who apparently have chosen North Korean style lifestyle under Drakeford. But I think there's enough English people that could be motivated given the right circumstances. But I mean, I despair of so much, especially the British media. British media is appalling, absolutely appalling. And they're responsible for much of this mass formation psychosis that you reference. People running from, Spanish flu to, World War III. Just sheep. That's unfortunate, being driven by mainstream media. So they're as much of the problem.
Right. David's passion is compelling. I understand his optimism and his need for hope and all the rest of it. People cling to hope and things like that. That's understandable. But, trying to solve politics with politics is like saying the cure for the European Union is more European Union.
Yeah, but hold on, whoa, Jeff. It's not about. I'm not a politician. The people watching this show who are saying, for crying out loud, will you all unite? They're not politicians.
I'm telling you now, that's, and I'm not trying to be sort of conceited or anything, that is the only way forward. I admire David's optimism. I think I'm as optimistic as he is. But the simple thing is, unless they get together and form a united coalition or whatever they want to call them, I don't know, I don't care. Unless they provide a proper viable alternative, then they've no chance. I would imagine that 4 people, maybe 5 people in Erdington at Birmingham today will retain their deposits. The rest will get the scraps. They'll get 200, 100, 350 maybe votes. Let's just see what the result is. But that's all they're going to get. And it's an absolute folly. And the only way, I mean, like, you know, with all the different parties, they've not even got enough candidates at a national general election to warrant a television broadcast. So what chance have they got? The media don't want to know. The press, the written press, unless you're very lucky and get a newspaper to support you, which is unheard of. UKIP found it very, very difficult to get into the theatre of politics in this country to begin with. They were vilified and looked at and scorned, and it took a lot of hard work and graft, as everybody here knows.
And then they got more votes than the SNP.
I admire David, and good luck to him, but he's absolutely no chance. And if he's looking at a marathon, you know, you're talking like UKIP was, you know, 20, 25 years to build a movement. And we haven't got 20 to 25 years. Just going back to your original question, Olly, about the state of things on a global scale. Yeah, the world is in an absolute. It's off its axis. It's in an absolute mess. Nationally here, I think it's starting to really hit. The way people are waking up, it's not through the pandemic and all that. They've swallowed that hook, line, and sinker. But what's really going to wake people up right now is the fact that they're going to be absolutely skint. They're going to have no money because they're heating car fuel, they're heating fuel, their food costs, their taxation. Wait till all the council tax bills come out. They've all gone up another 3 to 5%. Inflation's up, food prices are up, everything's up. They won't be able to go. And when it starts hitting people in their pockets properly and hard, and which it's going to do, and it is doing now, then that's when people are going to be waking up to the malaise of the country at the moment.
But if I can come in here, just following on from that thought, this is what I was kind of driving at with regard to you never know what's happening down the line. The whole net zero narrative put in place by Johnson and obviously, you know, endorsed by Starmer and the rest of them. That is, as you've just said, Stephen, that's going to hurt people till the pips squeak, because everything's going to become fundamentally, unaffordable. So, like, maybe you change things through something like, for example, if there was the referendum to leave the European Union did achieve something at any rate. Maybe if we had a referendum, for example, to remove net zero, could that catch the imagination of the British people? Because every British person is going to be affected by it. And sometimes, you know, maybe those are the sort of ways we do it. Because realistically, you know, as you say, you can't wait 25 years. I mean, we'll be long gone by then. And so maybe we just seize on a particular issue that's a big issue, and net zero is a big issue. And maybe that's where the hope lies. You know, it lies in something like that. And then you can get people, you know, coming together around that issue. Because I can't believe who's in favour of net zero. Well, all the people in the House of Commons are, and the rest of the 70 million people in the UK aren't. So it's us versus them. And maybe that might be something. I know Farage just floated that notion as well, like, by the way. But it's maybe not a bad idea.
People are getting together right now about the clear air zones because the government said to the local authorities, you must clear up the air within your city centres and outlying areas. Well, they've gone absolutely nuts. They've gone crackers, and they're imposing all these fines and charges and clear air zones. And the biggest one to fall is Manchester under Andy Burnham. He's in serious trouble in Manchester because it wasn't just Manchester city centre. He's created a 498 square mile clear air zone. I'm leading the Bradford campaign against the Bradford one. Birmingham has got one. They've got an anti-gas tax. Bristol has been suspended for a while. Manchester's now been deferred to 2026.
We've got a congestion zone now. They're starting in the summer, apparently, in Bristol.
Right. Well, no. It's been put on hold till September. And we're fighting Bradford at the moment with regards to the council and their imposition of it, because it's a punitive, pernicious tax on people, and people are waking up very slowly to this and what's going to happen. And the majority bill in Birmingham of people that have challenged the charges that they're getting The initial charge, I believe, is 60. Then it goes up to, and they've been getting bills for 280 quid because they haven't paid it and all that. And they're challenging it and going to appeals, and they're winning. So it's an absolutely pointless thing. Boris said yesterday in Prime Minister's questions, in an answer to one of the Bury MPs from Manchester, that Burnham had got this completely wrong, and it was wrong to charge and all that kind of thing. So he's distanced himself from it. Leeds, which is our biggest competitor in Yorkshire to Bradford and Huddersfield and Wakefield and all the other, Leeds never even bothered with it. They went down a different avenue of wilding and creating green spaces, planting more trees, etc., and to reduce their population. And basically these caste taxes are also based on a false premise of so many premature deaths, but they can't come up with evidence that supports their claims. In Manchester, they said it was 1,200 premature deaths per year because of pollution. In Bradford, they're saying it's 190, and they can't come up with any evidence that supports that.
Let me just chip something in.
Bradford, Bristol, Birmingham, and Manchester, the anti-caste tax groups were all linked together, and we're all fighting together. So again, if the Tories are largely in favour of banning them, but that is virtue signalling, and from my point of view, it's virtue signalling to win votes for May, and they're all suspending them till after the May elections. But people are wide awake to this; they're not stupid.
These clean air areas really fit with Agenda 2021, Agenda 2030, whatever the UN want to call it these days, these kind of controlled zones. Amanda Rolfson brings in a really, really good point. You talk about Bill, 3 or 4 weeks ago, fantastic show about inflation, which he said at the top of that show, nobody's going to want to watch this because everybody gets really bored by it. But this is actually what is going to change people's lives more than anything else. One of the questions that we didn't get time, but I was going to ask Godfrey, what's more dangerous, Putin or inflation? Amanda Rolfson says, look at the bigger picture down the road. So expensive, people will go into debt. Banks will take their homes, their cars, etc. You can then rent them. See where this is going? You know what? What is it that Klaus Schwab subscribes to? By 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Global communism. That's what the Great Reset is about. So my question to all of you, let's bring Bill back into this first of all. Is that where we're going? Is this not a deliberate wrecking of not just the UK economy, but economies around the world? They're certainly doing it in places like Canada and the United States, for example, to ruin people's lives, to basically slide them into massive debt and then give them this olive branch, which is universal basic income.
Well, don't forget, we're already in massive debt. As Godfrey mentioned earlier on in the show, we're hundreds of trillions in debt. Unsustainable amounts. The global economy doesn't function anymore in any realistic sense anyway. The financial aspects of it is just impossible. So there is going to be some form of change, whether it be Mr. Schwab's Great Reset and structured communist control from on high, or whether it be a catastrophic banking collapse and financial collapse plunges us all into a depression, and what the depressions often get accompanied by wars. Those are the things that are coming, and I always sound by the harbinger of doom, but it's just obvious that this is where we're heading. Whether it's deliberate or not, I would suggest that, as I've said before on some of our shows, I don't believe that people who run states and governments are idiots. And only an idiot would believe that the economic and financial policies pursued by the Western world over the last 10, 15, 20 years would go anywhere except taking us all down the drain. So, if they're not idiots...
Well, they deliberately made the inflation to get rid of people's savings, or to get rid of the purchasing power of people's savings. I suppose the next step for them would be to make inheritance illegal, or to make such large inheritance taxes that you end up with nothing as well, and things like that, to get rid of family money.
And they'll say we've got to do it because we've got to pay the COVID bill.
Yeah, exactly, Olly.
Is that what's your take on this, David Vance?
Well, you see, okay, my argument might be that politicians hate you. And once you understand that they hate you and they despise you, some things make sense. Exhibit 1, talk about the Conservatives for a second. A key Conservative voting demographic is the pensioner class. Pensioners overwhelmingly vote Conservative. Pensioners are on fixed incomes. Inflation is a destroyer of the life of many millions of pensioners here in Britain. The Conservative Party is deliberately, because as a consequence of the likes of the incredible spending on COVID and all of that, they've racked inflation up into double digits, and it'll go beyond that as well, because now we're going to have the joys of the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well to further increase things like fuel poverty on the elderly. So for me, the political elite hate you, and you need to accept that and understand that and not be their friend. And then second thing is, it's all deliberate. Bill Etheridge is 100% right. If you think that these things that's just a bit clumsy, don't be so naive. It's all 100% deliberate. The segue from COVID into Ukraine is absolutely planned and predictable, and where that will take us to next, who knows? But they will keep the narrative going. Essentially, I'm with Bill. This is an imposition of Chinese communist style communism around the world, and not least at the behest of our wonderful Conservative and Labour parties. And that's why, as I said at the beginning of this, British political system is broken, it's finished, it's dirt, it needs trampled, burnt down and start again in some way, in whichever way, I don't care even. But I'm under no illusions about this one.
I agree with most of that, David. What I would say is the system isn't broken. It works exactly how they intend it to work. It's all deliberate, like you were saying.
Good point. Yeah, Jeff, that's a very fair point. It was designed to accommodate them, not us, not the ordinary man, woman, and children in this country. It's exactly designed for their well-being.
And this is basically what Bill has been saying as well, isn't it? I mean, these people, they're not stupid. They're not stupid. They're hyper bright. I personally draw the conclusion that they're either controlled or else they're psychopathic.
Psychopaths. You beat me to the right word. I think they are either controlled or they're psychopaths. Some of them are clearly psychopathic. We've seen that over COVID. There's no doubt about that. And when I watch them at the moment, for example, some of them theorize, oh, maybe we should have a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I'm thinking, so you actually would like to see a mushroom cloud or two there? You'd actually like that, would you? Would that be good? Because if you think you're going to get away with that one without Russia responding, you are living in cuckoo land.
It's like something out of Dr. Strangelove, that idea.
Dr. Strangelove, yeah, exactly. That's who these people are. And so, yes, Jeff's right. They've built a system to suit themselves. And that's why we end up in this perpetual state of chaos and of fear and of ultimately, looking to them. They'll bring us universal credit, basic income, to solve. No, they won't. Universal basic income is the final stage of enslavement. That's why it has to be absolutely, completely opposed.
Yeah.
What never fails to amaze me.
Just hold on, PG, please, Stephen Place. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left.
What saddens me and never fails to amaze me is how much and how easily the British people have been socially engineered. If you think the Tories put us through 10 years of austerity, they absolutely wrecked the socio-economic status of this country to pay off a 56 billion deficit. And then within 2 years of having done that, they're borrowing 410 billion, which is non-existent money, to do whatever they've done. And some people have got awfully rich out of that. But yet here we go again. They've been socially engineered with regards to a war, and then they're going to be socially engineered with regards to what's coming in terms of banks crashing. I agree with Bill. I think the banks are going to crash. When they're going to crash, I don't know. And people are going to be panicking. They're already taking ATMs out in Belgium and parts of Australia. And some of the ATMs are going to Q codes, so you're not going to be able to just go and put your card in and grab your money out. They'll control everything. They'll control, there's talk about them controlling what you can buy, when you can buy it. And if you've been a good person and behaved yourselves, you can have a meat ration that week. But if you've had too much the next week, you can't have as much meat. You'll have to buy more potatoes and so on and so forth. People call you conspiracy theorists, and my two sons just shake their heads and Dad, what you're going on about? But actually this is real and it's happening. And yet I think Canada tried it. I think they're the Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and I think they're the ones that are trying to push it out and roll it out first, but they've hit some resistance. But their reaction to it is incredible. I mean, the woman, she's only 5'1", that led the truckers revolt in Canada.
Yeah,
she was wheeled into court yesterday in shackles.
Yeah.
You'd think she was Andrea's bloody Breivik.
She was denied bail. She was denied bail for helping people to set up bungee castles in a peaceful protest.
Absolutely, but people are just, they've rolled over, haven't they? And they've let it happen, and it's going to happen. And they're resorting to the courts, like Kinderhern, whatever she's called.
Look, Stephen, bless you, mate. We've run out of time. I tell you, I just want to say I am truly honoured. Oh, that's the wrong one. There you go. I am honoured by the people that have been on this show today. I'm honoured by all of you. God bless you, including you, Predator Jeff, mate. Thank you. You made some bloody important points.
Thank you, Ollie.
I'll tell you what, Godfrey Bloom, David Kurten, David Vance, Stephen Place, Predator Jeff, and Bill Etheridge. God bless you, Bill. Thank you so much, sir.
Hey, Ollie, thank you.
Yeah, wow, what a lineup. I'm seriously honoured. So honoured, guess what? I'm actually going to stop doing this show, Daily Chaos, as of next week. Next week is the last Daily Chaos, at least in this chat room format for the foreseeable future. And I'll tell you why. It's because people are still buying the bullshit coming out, emanating from the mainstream media. And I just cannot compete. And it is so frustrating, week in, week out, being censored by the damn Facebooks, these fascists at Facebook, the Nick Cleggs of this world, by the evil that is Google, i.e. YouTube, pulling shows. And then you know what? People come and watch the show and they don't even share it. And they're on my side. Seeing people that were avowed Brexiteers that are now reckon we got Brexit. I'm not giving up yet, but I've got to regroup personally, a bit like the truckers in Canada. And I want to say a big cheers to Bill Etheridge for co-hosting the last several shows. Been awesome. God bless you, mate. And a big cheers to see David Kurten and Bill Etheridge and Stephen Place get together to talk about the importance of these smaller parties uniting, and David Vance shoving in his cold hard, God bless it logic. So next week, here, wherever you are, subject to Cleggbook probably. Yeah, see you then. This has been Daily Chaos. I'm Olly Connelly. Here's to us and bugger plutocracy.
A little side thought for you, Ollie. How do you keep the public thinking that the politicians are inept?
Join me at Revolution Radio, Studio B, at 11 a.m. on Saturday.
Hold on, Jeff. Hold on, God bless you, mate. Hold on. I need to turn this thing off.
Take a look at philosophy, spirituality.